Hey, welcome back, everybody. It's Matt and Sheryl's Gen Excellent Playlist. I'm Matt.
I'm Sheryl.
And today we take a little detour from 1979 and adding songs to the playlist. We like to do these special episodes every now and then. It's a bit of a sad occasion and a kind of a happy occasion in a way. We're going to celebrate the life of one of the great studio musicians who passed away recently. His name is Jim Gordon, one of the top studio drummers in the late 60s and 1970s. And sadly, Jim Gordon died in prison where he was serving a life sentence for the murder of his mother. And that's, if you know his name, unfortunately, that's probably the main reason why. I know a lot of even avid music listeners probably not real familiar with a lot of these top studio musicians, but Jim Gordon, if you're making a Mount Rushmore of studio drummers, I think no question he is on there, along with Hal Blaine, Jim Keltner, probably.
Yeah.
I don't know who the fourth one would be. That would be up for a healthy debate. But Jim, at his peak, really at the turn of the 1970s, and you look at the list of albums that just came out in 1970 that he played on, it's a real mind blower. And he continued to play on big hit records throughout the early 70s. Things started to taper off for him later in the decade into the 80s as he struggled with mental illness. And that's part of the reason I say it's somewhat of a happy occasion with his passing, because he's been in prison since 1983, probably didn't deserve to be there because he was a very mentally ill man, had the misfortune of committing his crime in the wake of significant changes in the state of California as far as the legal defense of insanity. And that came in the wake of the assassination attempt on Ronald Reagan by John Hinckley in 1980. And Jim had not been really properly diagnosed before his incident. Clearly was diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic afterward, but couldn't really use that in his defense and spent the rest of his life in prison. Although he did come out for parole several times, kind of gave up on it early on and stopped attending the hearings. But sadly, that ended the career of one of the great musicians, somebody who left an indelible stamp on a lot of classic songs and albums and was a part of some incredibly talented collectives during the course of his career. We're going to review some of the top stuff that he played on this episode, get you familiar with his work. I think Jim probably best known musically for the song Layla on the Derek and the Dominoes album, Layla and Other Assorted Love Songs, that came out in 1970. Of course, this was Eric Clapton, essentially a solo album, but he didn't want to be a solo artist this time. He wanted to be in a group dynamic. And a lot of people view this album as an Eric Clapton solo album, but it's just a fantastic group effort, incredible ensemble that he put together. Sadly, didn't last for more than one studio album and one live album. The studio album came out in 1970. The song released as a single that year and then re-released again in 1972, went a little higher up the charts in 72. But Jim had already established himself as one of the top studio musicians in L.A. before Eric Clapton drafted him in. And that really started in his teens when he joined the Everly Brothers on a tour of England. He was a Southern California kid, born in L.A., raised in Sherman Oaks in the Valley, San Fernando Valley, middle-class family. Dad was an accountant, mother was a nurse. Just looked like the all-American boy.
Yeah.
Tall
and blonde and
tall, curly-headed, had a blonde hair, athletic guy. He was like 6 foot. Looked like he should have been playing college basketball.
Yeah.
Muscular 6'4" guy. In fact, he did get a scholarship offer to UCLA. He was offered a music scholarship, but turned it down to go pro, as it were, and joined the Everly Brothers on tour. And we'll start with a 1964 Everly Brothers album, Gone, 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 and his work on the title track. A lot of people maybe now familiar with that song because it was on the Robert Plant, Alison Krauss Raising Sand album, one of the standout tracks on that.
Mm-hmm.
I'd never heard of the song until I heard it on that album. Such a cool track. You want to go to the source material. But
yeah, their version is great, but Everly's though is definitely the definitive. Yeah.
And this is a very interesting era for the Everly Brothers. So they passed their commercial peak by this point. The Beatles had hit big now. The Everly Brothers were on Warner Brothers Records starting in the early 60s. And the Gone, Gone, Gone album came out in 64. So they're kind of passe at this point.
Mm-hmm.
They had their last big hit was really in '63, and I know you've explored this music more than I, Sheryl. They recorded a lot of really great music under the Warner Brothers label throughout the 1960s. It's kind of pioneering country rock stuff later on
Yeah.
in the decade.
Yeah, I mean, post Beatles, their sound toughened up a little bit, a little bit less polished, I guess you could say. But still, those harmonies never left them, and that's really their trademark. And there's some really great stuff from that era. And there's one album and this may be the one that he's touring with them for the Two Yanks in
Yeah.
England.
Mm-hmm.
That album is actually mostly covers of Holly's songs. And there's a Man for Man song on there, maybe a few others. And it definitely has that British invasion sound to it, but with the Everly's vocals. It's really cool stuff.
Strong country influence. They were in a family kind of bluegrass, old timey band. Their father was a legendary guitarist, Ike Everly, and they work with the cream of the crop, really, in Nashville. The top studio musicians there, Felice and Boudleaux Bryant, songwriters, provide them with it's just a wealth of incredible songs.
Yeah.
In the late 50s and early 60s, and those recordings still sound really great. They're just so well recorded. Beautifully played, beautifully produced and engineered. And of course, their harmonies, they basically wrote the book on two-part harmony.
Right.
And if you ask the Beatles who their top influences are,
yes,
Everly Brothers near the top of that list.
Oh,
certainly.
Yeah. One of the albums that Jim Gordon played on, Roots, was one of the first kind of country rock albums. There's a really good Warner Brothers Everly's collection. It's a 2-disc set. A good place to start.
Really, the track Gone, Gone, Gone is the standout here. And Jim Gordon
so good.
rocks the hell out of that song.
I love the drums on this song so much.
Yeah, Jim Gordon's just a teenager when he joins up on this Everly tour. And then that kind of served notice. I mean, the Everly Brothers, they're kind of yesterday's news by this point, but they were such a huge, important act in the early days of rock and roll that was a nice little thing for Jim to have on his resume. And he soon ingratiated himself to one of, I think, few would argue, the greatest studio drummer of them all, Hal Blaine.
Yeah.
And I think we should talk about the Wrecking Crew, because this is what this group of musicians came to be called. There's a great documentary. If you're a fan of popular music at all, seek it out, about the Wrecking Crew. Sadly, Jim Gordon is an afterthought in this documentary.
Yeah,
and I think
he's mentioned in fact, there's one shot of him. There's one part where they kind of show some photos of people that were kind of on the outskirts as how they represented. And Jim Gordon's one of those. In the book, there is a chapter about him. There's a book, also a companion to the film, but it's mostly just about his personal life and what happened with him. It's really not much about him as a musician.
And sadly, I think a lot of musicians just kind of shied away when he was going through his problems and had his breakdown and incident in the 80s. It's just very difficult for them to tread that ground. And sadly, that means a lot of his work goes overlooked. So anyway, he falls in his and it basically becomes Hal Blaine's protege. Now, Hal Blaine is a guy who has been cited as playing on, I think, 140 or more top 40 hits in his career. So as far as the Wrecking Crew, this group of studio musicians, they kind of coalesced primarily around Capitol Record Studios, late 50s, turn of the 60s, and really started to come to prominence with Phil Spector's rise as a successful producer. Of course, he's known for his wall of sound productions that used massive amounts of musicians and vocalists to create these just symphonic tracks. And these Wrecking Crew musicians really kind of coalesced around him there at the turn of the 60s, and Hal Blaine would have been his go-to drummer. But Hal Blaine was getting so many offers of work that he couldn't keep up with it all. And he had this young guy that he took under his wing and started sending work Jim Gordon's way when he couldn't fulfill the obligations. And that's how Jim Gordon kind of fell in with that group. So you got Hal Blaine, Earl Palmer, the great drummer out of New Orleans, some of the top sticksmen in that group of musicians, bass players, including Carol Kay, pioneering female musician, Ray Pullman, Joe Osborne, keyboard players, Larry Knechtel, Don Randy, Leon Russell, who would be instrumental in some ensembles that Jim Gordon would play with at the end of the decade, and guitarists Tommy
Tommy
Tedesco.
Tedesco. And that's actually the Wrecking Crew. The film was made by Tommy Tedesco's son.
Yeah, yeah. Billy Strange,
Mm-hmm.
another one of the top guitars. Leon Russell actually played guitar as well as keyboard. He was a very talented musician. So that's the Wrecking Crew. So he starts to get this work, and then next thing you know, Jim Gordon is heavily in demand as well. 66, really, things really started picking up for him. And one of the pioneering recordings or best known recordings or best loved recordings that a lot of these Wrecking Crew musicians played on was the Beach Boys' work in the mid 60s, the Pet Sounds album and the
Mm-hmm.
Smile Project, which never really came to fruition at the time, was only belatedly released in the 2000s. There was a slapdash LP thrown together called Smiley Smile
Yeah.
in 1967 that contained some of them. And more of the material from the sessions would eke out on Beach Boys albums for the remainder of the 60s and into the 70s even. Jim Gordon was one of the drummers that they called on for these sessions. And now here's where it gets tricky. Very difficult to pinpoint exactly what tracks, what particular musicians played on for this year because they didn't get credit.
Yeah.
It's only in latter days that these brilliant studio musicians have gotten their full due, like with the Funk Brothers movie, the great Motown musicians.
Mm-hmm.
They rarely got their names on the albums. So,
Yeah. No, that film really brought attention to them, the Wrecking Crew film. And I think, and like we have found, Matt and I have both found, trying to go back and find out what songs or albums Jim Gordon is playing
yeah.
on. It's like you're getting different stories from different, you look at liner notes on one album, you look at online at different things, and some people say it was Hal Blaine playing, some people say it was Jim Gordon. So it's really hard to know. And I mean, these guys, it is really incredible how many sessions they are on, and they just keep going from session to session, and they're having to on the fly read this music, figure out what to play. Now the drummers, I mean, they're reading music, they do have to
Yeah,
read music,
yeah.
of course, but
You have to have both abilities to be a top studio musician. You got to be able to read charts
yeah,
and play exact, because you're going to have sessions where the artist and the producer, the arranger, they're going to tell you exactly what they want you to play and no improvisation. You're going to have other sessions where you're going to have leeway to add your own interpretation. So you got to have both skills really to
yeah.
be a
And I
top
think for
studio
a
musician.
drummer, especially because it's not as cut and dry, it might be like, okay, this is 4/4 time you play, but I doubt that they would have like every fill written in that music. So they do have more leeway to bring in their own sound and their own feel to it and be a little bit more creative. And it's funny because when you listen to these, I mean, you can tell kind of what albums have a similar sound to them and where the Wrecking Crew is playing, but it's not like they all sound the same, I mean, there's definitely they're doing different styles, and it is really incredible just what
Yeah,
they accomplished.
you are not the artist per se here. You are there at the beck and call of the artist, the producer, the arranger to provide what it is they're looking for, whether that being a particular style of music. And these guys played on a whole range of different types of music from
Mhm.
pop to country to a lot of these guys had jazz backgrounds, like particularly with the Motown guys, the Funk Brothers. These guys would play sessions during the day, and then at night they'd be out gigging in Detroit playing jazz clubs.
Yeah.
A lot of these guys. So, and Jim Gordon was no exception. He played on a whole range of material. He played on jazz records. He played on country. He's on some of the most brilliant singles that Merle Haggard released. And this is only something I came to discover preparing for this episode. I've already referenced Merle Haggard. We put a song on the playlist in 77. But his great stuff in this, Mama Tried, that's Jim Gordon playing on a perfect track. Bottle Let Me Down, Swinging Doors, Branded Man. That's Jim Gordon, but I had no idea. So I thought Merle Haggard played with his studio band in the studio, but for the singles, he got the cream of the crop guys. He got James Burton in there. That's James Burton playing that beautiful dobro lick at the beginning of Mama Tried. And then Jim Gordon, it's a country date, so it's more subdued. It's a
Mhm.
very light touch. But if you're getting to the heart of what made Jim Gordon special for me, his ability to put down a rock solid pocket, just a propulsive driving drum track, and yet still he rarely repeated himself. I mean, he's just so inventive with his fills and accents, but never too busy, never got in the way of the song.
Yeah, and
But
actually he has
yeah,
a lot of his stuff is really subtle. Like
yes,
he's played on a lot of stuff like Different Drum, written by Mike Nesmith, the Stone Ponies
yes.
did. It's very nuanced. It doesn't feel like he can play with a heavy hand,
He's a
but
big athletic guy. He can slam,
a
no
lot
question.
of
Yeah.
this, especially the '60s stuff, like California Dreamin', he plays on that, doesn't he?
Again, this is
And
claimed that he played on that whole first album by the Mamas and the Papas.
yeah. And
Yeah,
actually, and Bobby Whitlock says that too, but he says that Jim Gordon told him that. So I don't know. I don't know
yeah.
if he if that's true or not, but it sounds like him, like his style.
The true answer in these questions lies in the paperwork because you have to have for the union, you had to clearly detail everybody that played on the
Right. You
session.
need to
So,
see the studio logs to really know.
yeah, the first-hand accounts of the musicians are classically unreliable, and Hal Blaine, notorious as anybody for claiming to have played on records that all evidence says he did not.
Yeah.
In fact, Hal Blaine insisted that he played on These Boots Are Made for Walking, where the studio log lists some other guy I've never heard of, Donald
And
Frost,
honestly,
I
they
think was the
probably
guy.
just forget because they're playing on so many things
Yes,
too.
yes,
Like they just
yeah,
don't
right.
they think they did, but they're like, well, I mean, they probably wouldn't deny the fact that maybe they didn't.
Yeah. Safe to say that Jim Gordon is on those Mamas and the Papas records. Is he on the whole album?
Mm.
I don't know,
Mhm.
but he's in there. Hal Blaine's probably in there as well.
Hal Blaine, Jim Gordon, and Jim Kellner are playing oftentimes on the same album, on different songs
Yeah.
on the same album, the three of them. So, yeah, I guess it just depends on who's available at the time.
So Jim Gordon did play on the album that These Boots Are Made for Walking was on. Lee Hazelwood called on him quite a bit. Not on the track, These Boots Are Made for Walking. Also, if you're talking about Phil Spector, the Wall of Sound production, many have cited the Ike Tina Turner track, River Deep Mountain High, as kind of the apex of his Wall of Sound, even though it was a commercial flop. It was a bigger hit in England than it was in the United States. Jim Gordon plays on the album, but again, I don't think he plays on that particular track. So he is on there on Pet Sounds. Pet Sounds isn't really a good album to listen to if you want to hear a lot of great drum work. I mean, again,
It's
it's
very
heavily,
subtle. Yeah.
very subtle, very
And there's a
heavily
lot of
orchestrated. Yeah,
and there's a lot of percussion on that album. And I found like with the monkey stuff, Jim Gordon is playing, but he's not playing drums, he's playing percussion.
yeah.
So they'd bring him in to be playing like, I don't know, like maracas or something in the background as well. And
He
that's it.
gets yeah.
Pet Sounds has a, I mean, who knows? Maybe he's the one clinking the Coke bottles together in the background, or maybe, there's all kinds of things that they're doing on that album that are percussive, but, they're not necessarily playing a drum kit.
So yeah, he's on there, but that's not really a good source to hear what makes him special. And he does get credits on those first two Monkees albums, although
He's not playing drum kit on any of the songs that are familiar, really.
my Monkees anthology, they list him playing on Mary Mary, which is great song. Actually, first recorded by Paul Butterfield on the East West album, and then the Monkees did there. It's Mike Nesmith tune, and then what's the other one? Oh, Papa Gene's Blues, and there obviously there's a lot of different percussionists on that track. There's all kinds of
what I found was that Hal Blaine's actually playing drums on those two songs, and that Jim Gordon is percussion.
I think he does get full drum credit on D.W. Washburn, which was a late Monkees single.
Yeah.
It's an interesting track, a real kind of throwback 30s, 20s feel to it. The
Monkees are using the Wrecking Crew and a lot of other studio musicians too, but they're probably like the epitome of the band using studio musicians. And it's interesting because when people found out that the Monkees were not playing on their songs, I guess people just didn't realize that most of their favorite songs the band is not playing on the album.
Paul Revere and the Raiders,
the Association, the Mamas and the Papas, like all of these bands are using session musicians.
Beach
now
Boys.
the Beach Boys, the one difference with the Monkees is that they're on TV miming to the songs as though they are playing them.
Yeah.
And, if you listen to like Mickey Dolenz and them talk about it, they came into the Monkees like, well, yeah, we're actors and we're playing musicians.
Nesmith and Torque actually had music background. They were more musicians than actors. Well, Dolenz and Jones were more actors than musicians, but Mickey Dolenz became a decent drummer. I mean,
they learned how to play their instruments after the first. The first two albums they're using session musicians. They started playing on the third, but they did have to learn because they toured. they toured in 1967 and they had to play their instruments. So Mickey Dolenz spent a year learning the drums, and he became like a pretty decent drummer. Now they were
And a
singing,
singing drummer.
and they were using their vocals all along. But Peter Tork and Mike Nesmith, like you said, they were musicians, and when they came into the studio, especially Peter Tork, for the first sessions, he brought his guitar. He was fully expecting to be playing on this, playing, singing, and they were like, "Oh, no, we've already recorded the back track. We just need your vocals." And he was like, he was upset. Mickey Dolenz, on the other hand, he's like, well, yeah, that's what we're just actors, so they were coming from two different camps. But it's interesting because when you go back and look at all these albums that the Wrecking Crew, especially, or these other session guys are playing on, it's just a huge amount of albums. And I don't think anybody thought about it at all, even though they'd see the band on Shindig and on these shows miming to the songs.
One thing I did notice looking at the credits on those first couple of Monkees albums and early singles, huge hit records like Last Train to Clarksville and I'm a Believer. And, this was obviously a big, important project. And they knew they weren't going to have these guys playing on the records. You didn't really have the cream of the crop Wrecking Crew guys on those records. There are a lot of lesser known names on those sessions.
Billy Lewis is the drummer.
Yeah.
On a lot of those. I don't know who that is.
There's not even a wiki page for him.
I mean, they were getting the cream of the crop of the songwriters. They had Neil Diamond, Harry Nilsson, Goffin and King, Boyce and Hart. Who knows? Maybe the Wrecking Crew was too busy recording Pet Sounds, or they were, because if their schedules are full, and they were, then they had to use who they could find.
Brian Wilson captured a lot of those great musicians and held them hostage for many weeks in the studio for that album. The other thing I was going to mention, I think a couple of misnomers about bands who didn't play on their records. The Beach Boys actually did play on a lot of their early records. It's really once Brian Wilson retired to the studio and started producing these big epic, albums like Pet Sounds and Smile, that's where you really get a lot of the studio. But a lot of the early Beach Boys hits, they're actually playing on those.
Yeah.
So I think that gets miscredited. What was the other thing? The Byrds. I think a lot of people assume that the early Byrds singles was all studio musicians. It was really just the first one, Mr. Tambourine Man. Only Roger McGuinn's 12-string guitar is on that record. The rest of it is Wrecking Crew guys. Hal Blaine is the drummer on that. But after that first single, at least for most of the first few Byrds albums, it's them playing. Although you get to the Notorious Byrd Brothers, and I'm skipping ahead here, they're starting to bring the studio musicians back because at this point the band is splintering.
And Gene Clark's solo stuff, and
Gene
and it's
Clark,
not because they're not great musicians; it's because they probably just don't want to be in the studio together, or they just don't have access to each other.
Probably part of it. So highlights in 1966, certainly the stuff he's doing with Merle Haggard in my book, and then. Bobby Darin started putting out folk-based music at this time, and Jim Gordon was his primary drummer on the If I Were a Carpenter single and album. I've got that vinyl record here. That's a beautiful work. So now we get to 67, and he plays on some big hit records this year. Feelin' Groovy, Harper's Bazaar, the Paul Simon song. That's Jim Gordon playing on that. Beautiful percussion on that. You already mentioned Different Drum. And that's an interesting record because really at the last minute, they totally changed the arrangement. It kind of made it into this more ornate orchestral pop song where it was a more rootsy feel to it before. And Linda Ronstadt mentioned after the fact that she really got thrown by that. And she's still a young performer, this super talented vocalist. And she says when she hears that record now, she hears fear
in her voice.
Vocals, she was not confident in her in singing in this arrangement,
which is kind of what makes it enduring, though.
Yes.
I mean, like she has a vulnerability in her voice that,
and it's also a strange.
It's
it's a song written by Mike Nesmith from a male point of view, and so she kind of switches the gender up on the. The lyric is basically it's a free spirited woman who doesn't want to get caught in a long-term relationship.
But she still keeps pretty.
I'd saying you ain't pretty.
Yeah, I like that that stayed in her version. And Mike Nesmith recorded this song too, on his own records, and it is definitely more of a countrified feel.
So when referencing Wrecking Crew guitarists, you really have to start with a name that I didn't mention earlier, and that's Glenn Campbell. So Glenn Campbell obviously went on to be a recording superstar, recording a lot of pop country and MOR type material. Incredible singing voice, but what a lot of people don't realize, this guy was a hotshot guitarist of the highest order. He was the guy in the Wrecking Crew. And actually, when Brian Wilson retired from the road with the Beach Boys, Glenn Campbell came into the band at that point, was actually part of the group, initially as a bass player, filling in for Brian Wilson. But when Glenn Campbell released his first big hit records, it was Jim Gordon on the Skins, on Wichita Lineman and Gentle on My Mind, two absolute stone cold classics.
Mm-hmm.
Wichita Lineman in particular, just this
Love it.
haunting song. So that's 67. Also, a couple of lesser known things here, and these both caught my attention last night and this morning. I've had this album in my possession for a while. Finally put it on for the first time last night. Incredible record, amazing headphones experience. This was a commercial. Well, I don't want to say a flop, but wasn't a big seller. Van Dyke Park's first solo album, Song Cycle, which was recorded early 67, released at the end of the year. Amazing piece of work, just super ornate classical arrangements, bizarre lyrics, shifts in mood, time signatures. Of course, we know Van Dyke Park's best from his contribution of lyrics to the Smile Project.
Yeah.
And that caused a lot of division in the Beach Boys. I think the apocryphal story is, Mike Love over and over, the crow flies over. What is this line from? Mike Love couldn't make heads or tails of these lyrics that he had to sing for the Smile Project, and heaped endless amounts of abuse on Van Dyke Parks during the recording. Yeah, of course, you could
That's
see
not
that.
surprising, though.
Mike Love is this kind of red-blooded alpha male, SoCal guy, athletic guy, and Van Dyke Parks is this little nerdy, weedy, kind of bizarre, kind of fey,
odd
Southern character, oddball. And so you can see where those two obviously didn't get along.
No.
But what an incredible record. Now, I know you're not a fan of Song Cycle. This is the first time I've ever listened. It's going to be an obsession for me for a while.
I think it's too quirky for me I love Pet Sounds. I'm not a huge fan of Smile. I do think there are some incredible tracks, though, that came out of those sessions. And the thing I don't like about the Van Dyke Parks is that it's got the quirkiness, the weirdness. I don't like his vocals. With the Beach Boys stuff from that era, that is quirky and bizarre, but you still have the Beach Boys vocal harmonies, and you still have Brian Wilson writing brilliant songs amongst all that. And
Van Dyke Parks is no great shakes as a vocalist. There's no question about that.
It really turns me off.
It works for me because this album is so esoteric, and the thing that jumped out for me is a big fan of Sufjan Stevens. I thought Sufjan Stevens, one of the most original artists of the 2000s, but clearly he'd heard this record before, because I hear a lot of influence there. Just the ornate arrangements of all different types of instruments, and Van Dyke Parks was the arranger on this record.
And the album is, it's considered kind of a classic and something that people do regard highly.
Huge budget record. It was like 3.5 times the normal recording budget at the time, and to listen to it on headphones is quite an experience. You listen to a lot of stereo mixes from that era. It's hard to listen to on headphones, just the hard panning, and it just sounds terrible. This is one of the great stereo mixes, I think, of the era, and Bruce Botnick is the guy who gets credit for that. Of course, one of the great engineers for his work with the Love and the Doors and all of them in the late 60s. This is another landmark on his resume. But you're not sold, clearly. I think you're more of a fan of the other album I wanted to talk about, which is the Beau Brummels album that year, Triangle.
That I think is cool. Triangle.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. That's more of it has a little bit harder edge to it. It's more of that 60s pop, but still a little bit more edgy, really. I know the Beau Brummels hits, but I hadn't listened to that album.
Yeah, no, that's my first time listening this morning. I listened to like 3 or 4 tracks from it. I don't love Sal Valentino's vocals on first listen.
They're different, yeah.
Yeah, I think with further listening, it'll grow on me, but the tracks are exquisite, just beautiful,
And the
beautiful
one song
tracks.
that was the single from that album is really weird, and I don't know why they released it as a single. It's orchestrated. It's kind of bizarre, and I was like, oh,
Yeah,
this is like I don't really like this, so I can see why that song just flopped.
yeah, kind of a
But
psychedelic magic. What is it called? Magic potion or
magic
magic?
something,
Yeah,
yeah,
magic
yeah,
something. Yeah,
yeah. But the rest of the album, I think, is definitely worth listening to. I
yeah.
cool.
Bo Brummels is a group that's kind of been on the radar for a long time, and I have not really gone down that road. But they were American answer to the Beatles, early folk rock. With Laugh Laugh Just a Little were their two main singles. Sly Stone was their producer on those on Autumn Records. They came out of the Bay Area. And then they too had a kind of early country rock Americana classic album called Bradley's Barn, which was their follow-up album to Triangle.
Yeah,
And
they
this,
seem more
yeah,
like Birds-ish to me, and like
yeah,
they have that folk rock and kind of
a
leaning into the
chiming
country.
sound. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So Triangle definitely going to be revisiting that. Now you get to 68, some really cool stuff starts to emerge. I want to say the first big hit record where Jim Gordon really lifted it to greatness was Classical Gas, the Mason Williams guitar instrumental.
Yeah.
That would not be what it is, not even close, without the drum work on that record.
Yeah. And that's another one different style that he's working on. And one of the great instrumentals.
We all know so we know the song. Where that song really takes off is in the middle, where big hard hitting fill, and this song hits another gear at
Yeah,
that point.
it amps
But
up for sure.
yeah, but his work throughout that record is really brilliant. Now we get into your wheelhouse, Sheryl.
Yeah.
1968, Harry Nilsson. I am
First,
just really starting my journey deep into Harry Nilsson's catalog. I know I'm going to be as big a fan as you when I get there, but Jim Gordon did a lot of work with Harry Nilsson here at the end of the 60s, and the Aerial Ballet album comes out this year.
yeah, and there's some songs on there that Harry Nilsson wrote that other people made famous. Well, there's one song the Monkees did, Daddy's song, but one is the loneliest number. You know,
Yep.
that's on that album. Actually, a song that is a cover that he made famous, Everybody's Talking from the Midnight Cowboy movie.
Beautiful drum track on that, too. Again, that song is not what it is without Jim Gordon. No question.
Agreed. The whole album is in that same vein, though, and just incredible songwriting. There's a quirkiness to Harry Nilsson as well. It's charming, but still musically interesting and doesn't take over the way that I feel like the Van Dyke Parks, where it takes over in a way that that's all you notice. The Harry Nilsson stuff isn't like that.
They're similar artists in that they're drawing on a lot of just a myriad of influences. A lot of them decades old. I mean, both Harry Nilsson and Van Dyke Parks drew heavily on the kind of the classic American songbook era. You know, the 20s, 30s.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Harry Nilsson does that kind of all throughout his career. In fact, he has some albums that are strictly from that era and that genre.
Little Touch of Schmilson in the Night was a prime example of that.
Yeah. And these albums, these early Harry Nilsson albums, this is where the Beatles are citing him as their favorite American artist. You know, like they're asked in interviews, who's your favorite artist? And they say Nilsson. And the British press and stuff, they're like, we don't even know who that is. You know?
total unknown at this point. His whole story is fascinating. We could easily do a whole episode just about Harry Nilsson, just his
and
whole
we have talked about him a bit, because Without You is a song that we have on our playlist that he made famous. And
I wonder who played drums on that. Was it Jim Gordon by any chance?
Because as we go later into Nilsson's career, we find that he plays on Nilsson Schmilson, one of the best albums of the 70s. And that doesn't come out until, what year was that? 72?
71, late 71. I think,
71.
It sold throughout 72. But yeah, so Nilsson worked with Jim Gordon quite a bit on several, but starting in 68, really starting at the beginning. But yeah, the early Nilsson stuff, it's orchestral arrangements, pop, quirky songwriting, and Everybody's Talking was actually not this is kind of the ironic thing about Harry Nilsson. Great songwriter, had hits for others, but his biggest hits were written by others. Everybody's Talking, Fred Neil's song, and Without You was a Badfinger song.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of unusual, but he's an interpreter too. Like he
Great vocalist, yeah.
great vocalist, and I guess he has an ear for great songs.
I want to get back to your Beatles reference. It's a great quote because I think the Beatles were at a press conference, and I don't know who was asked first, but like Lennon or McCartney, somebody asked, "Who's your favorite artist?" I don't know if it was American artist or favorite artist, and they said Nielsen. And then Lennon or McCartney answered first. Then the other one was asked, "Who's your favorite group?" He said Nielsen.
Yeah.
So obviously it sent journalists scram. Who is this
Who
Nielsen
is
guy?
this?
And it took a while for, I think, the impact of the Beatles endorsement to hit financially for it. Everybody's talking that had been laying around for about a year before it ended up on the Midnight Cowboys soundtrack.
Yeah. And actually
That's
that first
when
album,
it,
his first album came out in 67, and on that album he does a kind of a Beatles medley thing starting with You Can't Do That and goes into a few other songs, and he does a cover of She's Leaving Home. And so I'm once again doing cover songs, even though he is like, he's writing a lot of songs for other people that are hits, and he's doing cover songs on his own albums. But and that I can't remember. I believe that interview was around the time that he was recording this album. So I mean, there was a mutual admiration there between the two.
yeah. One of the great songs that he played on too is Good Old Desk. And the desk is very important in the Harry Nielsen story because when he did finally get his record deal, and he really hustled his way into the music business. Prior to that, he'd worked at a bank,
Mm-hmm.
pretty straight job, but he worked a lot of nights at the bank doing kind of programming stuff. And one of the things that he made a stipulation of his recording contract with RCA Records was that they would provide him with an office and a desk. And he would sit in that office and he'd have the desk and a telephone. And as his name started getting out, particularly in the wake of the Beatles endorsement, calls to RCA inquiring about Harry Nielsen would get routed to his desk, and he would answer his phone, and he would just talk directly to people. And notoriously, Harry Nielsen never played live. He was strictly a studio musician. So he'd get all these questions about, they'd ask him about personal appearances. So none. When's your
Yeah.
next personal appearance? There isn't any.
Yeah.
He's just quirky guy. But yeah, like I said, we could talk endlessly about Harry Nielsen.
Yeah.
Before we proceed here in 60, I want to backtrack a little. Another great 67 album that Jim Gordon played on. And again, you can't really pinpoint with more extensive listening to him, could probably figure out just based on styles. But the Tim Buckley Goodbye and Hello album, the second Tim Buckley record, the first side of that album is just so brilliant, start to finish. The second side I don't like quite as much, but side one, psychedelic classic, ending with I Never Asked to Be Your Mountain, which is just powerful, all acoustic song. One of the heaviest acoustic songs I've ever heard.
Yeah.
And there's two drummers on this record. It's Jim Gordon and a guy named Eddie Ho, who was known as Fast Eddie Ho. Played on a lot of Monkees records.
Yeah, he played on a lot of Monkees stuff.
Yeah. Great studio musician. Another troubled soul, unfortunately, who fell prey to substances and pretty much got wiped off the mat by the time the 70s rolled around. He was living on the streets for years, and he died just in the last few years. But two really good drummers. And it's hard. I think they're both playing on, there's a lot of percussion going on I Never Asked to Be Your Mountain, which is just epic track closing side one.
Yeah, there's more than one person playing percussion on that song. Yeah.
Yeah. So I wanted to mention that too. So 69 is when things really rocket to the stratosphere for Jim Gordon. He ends up in the Delaney and Bonnie and Friends collective. Go to YouTube. Well, first of all, if there's a YouTube page that just says Jim Gordon drums here. It's got about 400 videos on it. Just remarkable archive of his, and a lot of them are live studio or live TV appearances where you can actually see him at work. And there's a lot of great live clips of Delaney and Bonnie from this era. Scorching live band. And the heart of that band would become Eric Clapton's band and Derek and the Dominos. Eric Clapton notoriously joined up with Delaney and Bonnie. This is post Cream and post Blind Faith, where he just kind of wanted to sink into the background, be a part of a great band and not have his name out front in lights. Well, they would put out a record called Delaney and Bonnie on Tour with Eric Clapton, so they made sure his name got on the record. But it is one of the great live albums, and there's a lot of videos of them at work, particularly on the Beat Club show in Germany. And Jim Gordon, essential to this band's success with his propulsive rhythm in the back. And this is where he really developed that driving, soulful, funky style that would serve him well in 69 and 70, playing on a bunch of remarkable recordings.
Yeah, and going forward, really, that's kind of the style you hear most from him. And he kind of comes into his own, I think, in those recordings. And there is definitely a marked difference in his style.
Yes. I think this is where he really felt most at home, too. I mean, obviously, he's making a ton of dough as a studio musician. He's flying between sessions, going back and forth between Las Vegas and Los Angeles, playing shows at casinos and recording sessions in LA. He's leading this jet set lifestyle. And unfortunately, he would fall prey to that lifestyle, really starting in 69 with this group, notoriously abusing substances.
Yeah.
But the music that came out of this era, 69, 70. So you got the Delaney Bonnie record. You've got the Joe Cocker Mad Dogs and Englishmen tour and album, where Jim Gordon is playing in a double drum arrangement with Jim Keltner. I mean, you want to talk, what? Yeah. I mean, this is orgasmic if you're a drum fan. I mean, it's
monumental.
Ridiculous. And then to Derek and the Dominoes. And it's a lot of the same musicians that coalesced around all of these recordings. So you got Jim Gordon on the drums, Carl Radle on bass, Bobby Whitlock keys and soulful backing vocals, and Eric Clapton. Not on the Joe Cocker record, but on the Delaney and Bonnie and the Derek and the Dominoes albums. Just superb, soulful, gospel-drenched, funky, tight, amazing music coming out during this era.
Yeah, and actually before Derek and the Dominoes, he played on All Things Must Pass.
Right. And this, again, the same group of musicians. A lot of the same
group of musicians. Yeah. And, Eric Clapton, George Harrison friends. They're part of the same group.
And yeah, Eric played on that album, and both Eric and George would play on Delaney and Bonnie's tour as an album.
Yeah, so you've got a lot of the same people here working together. But yeah, he was called into the All Things Must Pass sessions, and George had a plethora of songs. I mean, a huge amount of songs, which became the double album portion of All Things Must Pass. And then there's a third album called Apple Jam, which is basically what became Derek and the Dominoes, that band just kind of jamming. And of course, such a classic album, incredible playing, incredible songs. George had all these songs left over, several of them that he had already recorded demos with the Beatles several times, and they just never put them on any albums. And, so he had, these songs were fully fleshed out and just ready for a great band to take over, and which is what happened. I think that's kind of too where you really start to get his style, Jim Gordon's style, a mix of driving rock, but also acoustic and like really pretty. That album is one of the most beautiful albums, really. And George, I think, he writes such pretty songs.
Yeah.
And the two best songs he wrote for the Beatles, Something and Here Comes the Sun, are two of the most gorgeous songs ever written.
Yes.
And that kind of carries over into All Things Must Pass, too. There's a lot of really gorgeous melodies in that album.
And that's where Jim Gordon's value, too, where he could be just this driving rhythmic force, this powerhouse backing on some of these Delaney and Bonnie and Derek and the Dominoes tracks, and then just the perfect, subtle, light touch to add to the more lighter acoustic stuff as well.
Yeah, and that came from him working as a session musician, all these different styles. He kind of uses all of that in All Things Must Pass.
So really, for me, the apex of Jim Gordon is 70-71 here in some of these recordings that he played. So on the Derek and the Dominoes record, Bell Bottom Blues is just such a phenomenal song, this passionate song, one of several on the album. And really, the heart of this album is Eric Clapton's, lyrically and vocally, is his unrequited love for George Harrison's wife, Patty. And Bell Bottom Blues is one of 4 or 5 tracks in this album that's really lyrically inspired by this just aching
and
desire
Layla.
He has for another man's wife. And the singing on this is just so heartrending and passionate, but the drum track on Bell Bottom Blues, so original sounding. And it's kind of hard to figure out what he's doing. One of the keys to his sound was the way he tuned his drums, too. And there's a lot of interesting stuff going on that drum track on this. And the drums, Derek and the Dominoes record is not a great recording. It's dirty, it's muddy, not an audiophile recording by any stretch, but the drums are well recorded. And you really hear in detail how the tuning of his drums really affects the track, particularly on that song. And that's really where, that was my breakthrough Jim Gordon moment. I've always loved that song. I think that's maybe the best thing Eric Clapton's ever played on. But I started to notice the drums, and then listening to the whole album, I'm like, 2 albums for me. And I've become more and more fascinated by drums and percussion as my musical appreciation has grown over the years. 2 albums for me that I think get overlooked as great drum albums. One is the Derek and the Dominoes album, because everybody looks at, oh my God, Eric Clapton and Dwayne Allman.
Allman. Yeah.
The drumming on this album is phenomenal, start to finish. And then it's another album we're going to talk about pretty soon that came out at the end of 1979. It's The Clash's London Calling. I mean, that is just Topper Heaton puts on a clinic start to finish on that album. And
so
again,
many
the
different
drums,
styles, and yeah,
and the recording of the drums is so great on that album too. It's Guy Stevens and Bill Price in the studio. But yeah, this was Jim Gordon in excelsis for me. The Bell Bottom Blues, that track, and then the groove on Eric Clapton's Let It Rain on his solo album that came out the same year. The outro on that, the groove they get into, you want that to go on forever. It is just it's unbelievable.
Yeah, that's probably my favorite Eric Clapton solo song.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't realize he was drumming on that, but it makes sense.
And the Derek and the Dominoes live album in concert, they do Let It Rain on there, and Jim Gordon gets a drum solo that is very highly regarded among other drummers. But that is one of the great grooves of all time, certainly. And then you've got another album that came out the same year, same group of players. That's Dave Mason's Alone Together. So you've got that album, which features Only You Know and I Know. Delaney and Bonnie did their version of that. And then Dave Mason's solo album, incredible track. Again, fits right in with all these amazing tracks recorded by the same core of musicians in 69 and 70. Shouldn't Have Took You More Than You Gave.
Yes.
Also on that album.
And that also is recorded with Traffic, and Jim Gordon plays on Welcome to the Canteen, the live album.
So Dave Mason was in Traffic on those first 2 Traffic albums, Mr. Fantasy and the self-titled album, left to go solo. And then he rejoined Traffic briefly for a tour, and that's where they recorded Welcome to the Canteen. Jim Gordon is the drummer in that iteration of the group. Their live version, so Medicated Goo might be my favorite Traffic song. That came out on the Last Exit album. It's Jim Capaldi playing on the studio version of that. Funky as hell. But the live version of that it's a different beast. And again, it's Jim Gordon driving the train here with that propulsive drum style. And it's an express train. Now, I prefer the studio version, but I love the live version. It's just a great song. And then he plays on another version of that song. P.P. Arnold recorded Medicated Goo on her solo album, which was buried for years and only recently reissued. That's another great take on a great song by a beautiful, soulful vocalist. And Jim Gordon's the drummer on that, too.
And I guess he did play on Low Spark of High Heeled Boys, too, but I think he's only on 1 or 2 songs.
No. That's him. That is him on that album. That's mostly Jim Gordon.
Oh, you're right. Yeah. That is. So he does play on the song Low Spark of High Heeled Boys.
And again, okay. if you're
Rock and Roll Stew, yeah.
If you're singling out 4 recorded examples of his greatness, I think Low Spark of High Heeled Boys has to go up on that Mount Rushmore.
Yeah, for sure.
Again, is that track as good as it is without Jim Gordon on it? I don't know. I just don't know. And that whole album is brilliant rhythm work.
Yeah. Yeah, and that song just has such a feel to it. And that's where another drummer could be playing the exact same thing, but it's the feel behind it that's really what makes that song. So it probably wouldn't be the same without him.
So his apex as a musician really in this, 69 to 71 time period, but also this is where his troubles really start to surface. He was schizophrenic. He's hearing voices, hallucinating, and amazing that he was able to continue on with his career and play on so many great records and tours while battling this. And notoriously, we didn't even mention this, Layla, he gets a co-writing credit on that song because he contributed the piano, the end part of the song, the piano part. Well, did he really? I
Yeah.
mean,
Well,
he
he contributed it, but
yes
did he write it?
contributed, but person who gets left out of the equation here is Rita Coolidge, who was his girlfriend at the time, and all evidence suggests that they co-composed this music. She never got a writing credit on it, and that relationship ended on a very sour note because he punched her in the face on the I think it was the Joe Cocker tour.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so obviously starting to show signs of trouble here. And that wouldn't be the first time that he was abusive to a lady friend. And you could see he's a great ensemble player, but he never lasts long with any particular group. He's bouncing around to this and that. And that's a telltale sign, too, the trouble is brewing. He and Clapton notoriously didn't get along at all, although Clapton has said, maybe the greatest rock and roll drummer that I played with. And here's a guy who played with Ginger Baker saying this.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and then
Yeah.
let's not overlook Jamie Oldacre either, who played on his great solo stuff in the set. Another wonderful drummer who's no longer with us. So his problems are starting to surface, and they're exacerbated by drug use. And the Derek and the Dominoes recording sessions notoriously soaked in heavy drugs. All these guys were heavily into narcotics, heroin and cocaine.
Mm-hmm.
And it would sideline Clapton for almost 4 years. He basically went into seclusion after the Derek and the Dominoes and the solo album came out in 1970. He was a hardcore junkie at this time.
Yeah.
All those guys were using. So part of, what we know about mental illness now, and again, 60s and 70s, we were not really too up to speed on how to treat and diagnose. Oftentimes, and I live in Portland, you live near Seattle, you see the problems on the streets right now. All these people out there who get filed under junkies and drug abuse, but
Right.
a lot of times it's mental illness that funnels into that, and these people are self-medicating.
They're self-medicating, and that's what Jim Gordon was being treated for alcoholism, but they never delved deeper to find the root of the issue.
Yeah. But he continues to get work. So 71, the Low Spark and High Heeled Boys, brilliant work on that. And of course, the Nilsson Schmilsson album, which we referenced, he is all over that record, which was a huge hit record for Harry Nilsson. Without You, a massive hit single. But other great, you could hear the different styles on that album. So the driving rhythm that we see in Delaney by Derek and the Dominoes, definitely on Jump Into the Fire.
Jump to the Fire, yeah, for sure. And that long coda at the end where they just go off. Mm-hmm.
And then again, if you're putting together a Mount Rushmore of his percussion work, I think Coconut has to go on there. Basically, this song is a showcase for Harry Nilsson's vocal flexibility. He famously had 4-octave range.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a percussion showcase for Jim Gordon as this song builds and builds and builds. It kind of got written off as a novelty song, but I've come to really appreciate the brilliance of this track, and that's mainly to do with Jim Gordon.
Oh, yeah. It has such a cool groove to it. Yeah. I think of it as a novelty song because I remember it was on The Muppet Show. And they did a version of it where it was Kermit singing My Flipper Ache. And it is one that warrants re-listening with a more critical ear, especially on the percussion.
So 72 rolls around. He's still a very in-demand session drummer. He contributes to a big hit record for Carly Simon, You're So Vain. Critical drum track on that. But maybe the thing that's blown me away the most is, and maybe the most influential track that he played on of all of them, was recorded in 1972. And that's the incredible bongo band recording of Apache, which is one of the most sampled drum tracks in all of the history of hip hop.
Yeah. And we talked a little bit about this when we were doing the Cliff Richard episode, because the Shadows, Cliff Richard's backing band, is actually who recorded Apache originally. And it was a huge hit for them. But then this incredible bongo band was just a studio creation.
Yeah, it's a studio album focused. I mean, it's called the Incredible Bongo Band, so there's bongo percussion
Yeah.
throughout. But Jim Gordon is the one laying down the incredible backbeat. And the guy, for such an inventive and subtle player, he was incredibly metronomic with his timekeeping. But it's not just the drums on this track. The whole thing, it's just this epic instrumental, incredible studio achievement. But if you hear the drums, you'll recognize it from countless hip hop records as a sample.
Yeah, there's a break in the middle where there's a long
Yeah.
drum passage, and that's what has been sampled so much. But even just the way that they do the dun 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 dun, and then you got the bongos. It's really, really cool. In fact, this is a song that should be played at sporting events.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm sure it is by the hipper music programmers, certainly.
Maybe you need to start playing it. Yeah.
He played the drums on Summer Breeze, maybe the greatest, the archetypal soft rock song. So here's a guy who's played on one of the greatest country records ever made, Mama Tried by Merle Haggard. In my opinion, the greatest soft rock track ever recorded, Summer Breeze by Seals and Crofts.
Mm-hmm.
He played on one of the most influential tracks in the history of hip-hop, the Incredible Bongo Band's recording of Apache, and just some of the greatest plain old, rootsy, southern gospel, funk-infused rock and roll ever made, with Derek and the Dominos, Delaney and Bonnie, Traffic, Leon Russell et al. At the turn of the 70s. So the breadth of this guy's career and influence is staggering.
Yeah,
just staggering.
It really is. And I mean, starting off with the Everlys.
But unfortunately, things would taper as his mental issues became more of a problem for him, increasingly unreliable because of that and because of the drug abuse. Still continues to play on hit records. Johnny Rivers, Rockin' Pneumonia and the Boogie Woogie Flu. Sundown by Gordon Lightfoot. He played on that. I believe he also played.
Yes.
I'm not certain on that. I believe he also played on Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, which is a famous one. Oh, he did not play on that.
He didn't play on that. Nope.
He played on the album. He didn't play on that particular
He didn't play
track.
on that song. Yeah.
He played on a few
Hal
different
Blaine
Gordon
did.
Lightfoot albums.
But Sundown, one of my favorite songs of that era. Yeah.
And again, the rhythmic backing on that, critical to the success of that song. He played on Jackson Browne's Pretender album in 1976, but things really start to slow down for him. And it's just a sad story because here's a guy who clearly was struggling, not getting proper treatment for his mental illness, and then has this horrible breakdown and commits this. It's a grisly crime, no matter how you slice it. He didn't only murder his mother; he bludgeoned her with a hammer and stabbed her with a butcher knife. I mean, it's just horrible, horrible crime. But here's a guy who needed to be in a mental hospital, being treated by doctors, not locked up in a prison. And because of the timing of when this crime was committed, real injustice that he got locked up, and that was it. He was in prison the rest of his life and died in Vacaville in California just a few weeks ago. Just sad that we lost such a talent.
It's so sad. And there's an interview that you can listen to on YouTube from Modern Drummer. And did you listen to the whole interview?
Yeah, listen to the whole thing. Yeah.
So this was recorded in November of 82.
Yeah, he just sounds like such a normal dude, you know?
He does. He's he's very lucid. You know, he's talking about the past and the future, talking about writing his own songs.
Yeah,
just wanting to play as much as possible and like practicing still. And
we did kind of gloss over his solo recordings, which are he released this thing called the Jimmy Gordon's Jazz and Pops Band.
Oh yeah,
the end of the '60s, pretty cheesy. I mean, there's a lot of their studio guys play on some great drumming on it, but instrumental recordings of older songs, just a high cheese factor.
It's super groovy. In fact, I was thinking that it sounds like the music that Greg Brady puts on his turntable in the living room when he wants to dance with his dates.
That's a good analogy. But you just get the sense that he was a guy most at home playing in a great band, in a great ensemble. And because of his troubles, he just could not last with any collection of musicians.
Yeah, well, with that Modern Drummer interview, I guess the guy who was interviewing him says that Jim Keltner was one that set that up. because he knew that Jim Gordon was not doing well and he kind of wanted to lift his spirits. And so he set up that interview. And it's just unbelievable to me that that's like a year before the murder happens, because he's talking a lot about the future, and wanting to continue playing and still learning, and he does talk about like tuning, how he tuned his drums and like he's talking about all the different symbols he uses, and his memory seems there. So I don't know, that just after listening to that, it really made me feel even more just sad.
Yeah, it's off-putting in a way to listen to it, because here's a guy who had been struggling with mental illness, heavily into narcotics, heroin, cocaine, alcohol abuse, and he doesn't sound like some burnout. He just sounds like
no.
All indicate everything you hear about him over the years, like famously Frank Zappa, and he played on an Apostrophe, he played in the Grand Wazoo Band, the Petit Wazoo Band. Again, showcasing that versatility, obviously intricate music of Frank Zappa. Frank Zappa called him Skippy on stage because he's just like the all-American boy, real straight kind of character. Everybody sees just a nice, unassuming, normal-seeming guy, in this crazy rock and roll world, and playing in these aggregations of musicians that were heavily partying during this time period.
Not good influences.
And he was right there with all of them in terms of indulging. And I think it's important for all of us to understand that mental illness inflicts millions and often goes unnoticed, undiagnosed, because of the stigma behind it. It's just,
and even more at that time.
Right. And because so many musicians were into drugs and substances, a lot of them went undiagnosed.
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine now? He punched Rita Coolidge. She continued on that tour. Didn't talk to him, completely cut off ties with him, but she finished out the tour
with a big black eye.
With a big black eye.
So it's a tragedy. And obviously it's a tragedy that his mother lost his life in such a horrific, violent way. But there's a reason we have different levels of adjudication for minors and for people with mental difficulties. They're not 100% responsible for their actions. Minors' brains haven't fully developed yet. Yeah, a lot of minors have committed horrible crimes, but their brains continue to grow and develop. That's why we don't treat them the same way as adults. And if you're dealing with mental illness, you can say, well, sure, the voices in your head told you to kill your mother. Why don't you just ignore the voices? It doesn't work that way. That's the reality for somebody with schizophrenia. These voices are as real as these headphones I'm wearing, this desk that I'm pounding. They're real to these people suffering from mental illness. You can't just ignore it.
And when you add the drugs and alcohol into the mix too, your sense of reality becomes even more skewed. I'm glad that we were able to go back and really look at his history as a drummer, because really I knew there were some things, that I knew he played on, but there's so much there that I didn't know about.
Way more than a footnote in music history. He was a critical player in some of the greatest rock music and other kinds of music ever recorded.
And it's a tragic story in the end, but I would hope that he would be remembered for what he did contribute.
Yeah, and I hope we've helped somewhat in that regard by giving him tribute today. And I know others have done it online as well, but important to highlight the work of these great session musicians of the 60s and 70s for what they did in creating some of our favorite music.
And most of the time they did anonymously.
Yeah. So the good news is he's no longer tormented, and he's hopefully in a better place now. And we'll get to enjoy his music in perpetuity. And there's a lot of it. There's a lot of it. In fact, I told Sheryl before we started this episode, I wish I were more organized today, but I feel like I need a couple more months just to absorb all of this incredible music that he was a part of. And it's already opened doors to new discoveries that I'm going to be enjoying. And it's like the Song Cycle album, like the Triangle album by Bo Brummels.
Yeah, me too. Joey Steck, who was in the Millennium, his solo album, which is really cool. Nils Lofgren, Cry Tough.
Yeah.
Great album. Or Emmett Rhodes, American Dream.
Yep, that's waiting for me. I kind of dipped my toe in that. Some great music by Emmett Rhodes. I mean, other great stuff. The Pretzel Logic album, third Steely Dan album. He drums all over that, almost every track. Ricky, Don't Lose That Number. That's Jim Gordon on the drums. My Maria, B.W. Stevenson. May not ring a bell just hearing the artist and the title, but if you heard the song, you'd recognize it. That's him on that too. So many great hits in the 70s. Could just go on and on. But legend and possibly my favorite drummer of all time, Jim Gordon. Wanted to pay tribute to him today. We will get back into 1979 the next time that Sheryl and I reconvene. I got a bit of classic pop that wasn't a hit until later on for a different artist, but one of my favorite female artists recorded this song in 1979. Sheryl, do you know what you've got lined up for our next 1979 episode?
We're going to be talking about drums. We're going to be talking about a drummer.
That's right. More drums. The last stand for perhaps the greatest rock drummer, certainly greatest hard rock drummer of all time in 1979. And Sheryl will give her take on that. And hopefully we'll explain to non-percussionists like me what goes into the shuffle groove and why that can be tricky for even talented drummers. So that's what we got coming up when we next convene for Matt and Sheryl's Gen X Lit playlist and continue to add songs from the great music year of 1979. But until then, you've been listening to Matt and Sheryl's Gen X Lit playlist. I'm Matt.
I'm Sheryl.
And we'll see you again next time, folks. Thanks for tuning in. Take care.